Okay, this is David Zierler, Director of the Caltech Heritage Project. It is Tuesday, January 3rd, 2023. I am delighted to be back with Dr. Sudhir K. Jain. Sudhir, once again, it's a great pleasure to be with you. Thank you for joining me.
Good to meet you, David, again.
Sudhir, today what I want to do after yesterday's discussion, we took a wonderful tour of your approach to research and activism and higher education. Let's go all the way back to the beginning for you. Perhaps we'll start at the most basic level with your name, both your first name and last name. What is either the meaning or the origin of your name?
So, uh, my last name is Jain. Now, Jain indicates a religion. Uh, so, my family is follower of Jainism, and we are a small minority in India. And some Jains write Jain as a surname, as a family name, but not all. My first name is a fairly common name. Uh, it essentially means somebody with good patience. And the middle name is a very common uh, name that is just tagged along. That doesn't mean much, the middle name. Yeah.
Now, your first name, do you think you've lived up to its ideals? Have you exhibited good patience in your life?
I don't know. I don't know. I've been too patient sometimes and I regret it, and I've been too impatient sometimes and I regret it.
Now, growing up, did your family practice Jainism? Was that a part of your upbringing?
Yes. So I came from a moderately conservative Jain family. Uh, the uh, essential aspects are extreme non-violence of any kind, uh, which means that you should not say harsh words. That is also violence. Or you should not tell a lie. That is also violence. And that you should not hold more wealth than what you need. That is also some sort of a no. So I came from a moderate conservative Jain family, and but I have not been very religious in the sense of uh, the rituals, the going to the temples or standing in front of the picture of the god or the statue of the god and praying. That has not been the case. But philosophically, I try to follow uh, the good things that perhaps most religions teach, anyways.
So, dear, let's go back and establish your family's origins. Where in India is your family from?
So we are from my father's. We are from the Western UP, Western Uttar Pradesh, uh, not too far from Delhi. Uh, and both my father and my mother, they grew up in small villages. And my father came out of the village and studied and joined the government service. And he therefore was uh, in a position which means you get transferred from one town to the other town. So I went to school in many small towns, and therefore my schooling was done over maybe 7 or 8 different schools, something like that.
What level of education did your parents attain?
My father did a undergraduate degree, and then he got a what in those days used to be called diploma in engineering, and he was a civil engineer working for the government. And my mother did some basic schooling in the village, not more than that.
Now, did your father involve you in his work? When you were a boy, did you understand what a civil engineer did?
So I would sometimes accompany him to the site where a building is under construction or a road is under construction. And it was a good time to bond with him, to spend time with him, and to see what he does. Yeah.
Were your parents or grandparents affected either by World War II or by partition?
No.
What did that mean for that region when independence happened in 1947? Nothing really changed?
But these were rural areas in western UP, so I don't think that there was any significant migration one way or the other uh, as a result of the partition or the independence. Yeah,
Sudhir, what languages were spoken in your household growing up?
always only Hindi.
And where did you pick up English? Was that only in school?
Yeah, English was only picked up as a second language in school, and up to class 12, I would read math and physics and chemistry in Hindi. And it is only when I went to the engineering college that I started to study in English books for my subject. Yeah.
Now, when you mentioned you switched many schools, did you move around a lot geographically?
Yeah, different towns. So my father will get transferred to another town. So I would study in a school for 1 year or 1.5 years, and then he'll get transferred to another town. So the whole family will move there to the new town, and then I'll go to a new school, and then another year or 2 years, he'll again get moved to another town, like that.
Do you think those experiences served you well in terms of adaptability and meeting new people?
I would say those had helped me build some resilience, but one of the interesting thing that happened was that I happened to be in a particular town for 1 year where there was a teacher, school teacher, who influenced me very deeply. And he remained my friend, philosopher, guide, my mentor uh, for very, very long time till he died. So
What was his
that
name?
was Mueed Ahmad Azmi, a Muslim gentleman. Uh, that will be 70, uh, almost almost 40 years. He remained in touch with me for 40 years. You know, that was a very enriching, uh, very valuable mentoring and influence that I had.
Sudhir, tell me about your education in high school. Did you have a strong curriculum in math and science?
See, the kind of schools I went to were not great schools. They were pretty ordinary schools. Uh, I was perhaps reasonably good in studying math and science. I wasn't so good in English or Hindi. The languages was not my strength. Similarly, the social sciences, the geography, the history, that was not my strong point. But I was fairly good in math and science. And that is what carried me through. Uh, it took me a while to understand the value of other things. Uh, yeah.
Between geography and your grades and your family's financial situation, what colleges, what undergraduate schools were available to you when you finished high school?
I could have gotten almost any school in India for engineering. So there is a very competitive exam in India for engineering school to go to IIT. And in those days, there were these 5 IITs, Indian Institutes of Technology. And I had an all India rank of 69, which means that I could get to any institution that I wanted to. I also got into Roorkee, and Roorkee is where my father had studied, and some of my uncles had studied. And, with some persuasion from my father, I decided to eventually go to Roorkee and do civil engineering.
Was your father encouraging of you to pursue civil engineering? Did he have positive experiences in his career?
That's right. That's right. That's right. That's right. He thought that is the only engineering worth pursuing.
Now, at the time, the University of Roorkee was not part of IIT.
No, no.
What was the circumstances of it becoming an IIT school? How does that work?
So the way it works is that Roorkee was the oldest engineering school, not only in India, but in the entire British Commonwealth. set up in 1847. And it was very, very prestigious. And there was some conversation, some discussion apparently that the government of India wanted it to be taken by the central government uh, and perhaps made it like an IIT or make it an IIT. And UP government, the government of the state, it's like state university versus the central university. So the state university wasn't inclined to part with the prestigious university that it was very proud of. Uh, Later, the state of UP itself got bifurcated into two states. And geographically, Roorkee went into a state which was mountainous area whose economy was not so strong. And they felt that this is a lot of expenditure. And they were very happy to let it go to the central government. And central government then made it an IIT.
Now, Sudhir, in India, is it like the British system where once you enter college, you declare the major right away?
Yeah, yeah,
Did
yeah.
you have a more general education, or it's technical, it's focused right from the beginning?
It was practically a engineering college, engineering education. There were very nominal humanities requirement, but very, very nominal. And those were not done with the rigor, and those were not taken with seriousness by the students. So,
Among the undergraduates in the program, how many do you think had ambitions for academic style jobs as opposed to going into industry?
in my class, practically there were none, right? The young people of the generation that I was in, uh, teaching was not considered a very glamorous job. And Roorkee students like us had not yet understood the potential of going to United States for higher studies and for settling down. The students from IIT had learned it, especially IIT Kanpur was set up by American uh, financial and technical aid. So there was a very large number of students from Kanpur that would go straight to American universities. And then once they study in American schools, they would end up staying back, things like that. But in Roorkee, that was not so common.
Now, were your ambitions when you started to go into industry like your father? Was that the plan?
No, the plan was that I made a deal with my father that I will not be a professional engineer. Uh, I didn't want to be a civil engineer. And mm, when I eventually decided that, okay, that's what I'm happy to do, then I said, in that case, I would rather be a professor. Uh, there was a particular professor at Roorkee who my father and my uncles used to admire. And when I was finishing my high school, and there was a big discussion in the house, where should I go to, civil engineering in Roorkee versus electrical electronics engineering in one of the IITs. My father took me to meet some people, some eminent people, to see if they would answer my questions. And during that trip, he took me to this professor in Roorkee. And when I met him and the way he handled me, I was quite impressed. And I said, I would like to be like him. I would like to be a teacher like him one day. And so I told my father that you would not ask me to be a professional engineer. And he said, yes, fair enough.
Now, did you realize if you had academic ambitions that the best path would be to leave India for graduate school?
So the thinking at the time was that I want to be a teacher at Roorkee. So that was also in the ambition part. And in those days, you could get a teaching job with a master's degree, and rarely, sometimes even with a BTech degree, undergraduate degree. But for your career progression, for your growth, you needed a PhD. So it was clear that you need to do PhD. And there was something inside that said, you want to do a good PhD, you want to go to a good school. So this professor uh, at Roorkee, he he was my role model. While I was still a student, finished my junior year, he became director, the president of the IIT in Delhi. And one day I went to him in Delhi and I asked him, uh, I want to study further because I want to be a teacher, as I have been telling you. And I want to go to possibly America or somewhere to do a good PhD. And what do you advise? And he said, look, America has some very good universities, but also some mediocre universities. So why don't you try only the top universities? And if you get them, fine. If you don't get them, come to IIT Delhi or go to any other IIT, do your master's degree, and then try for these top universities for PhD. So that is how America was not the high priority. Uh, Going to study further anywhere in India or outside was the plan.
Sudhir, did you excel in your undergraduate studies? Did you do very well in civil engineering as an undergraduate?
Yeah, I was all through 4 years. I was, you know, the highest ranker in civil engineering in all the university, the entire, all the branches of engineering. Yeah,
Did that help clarify your ambitions, that it seemed like going beyond being a teacher of engineering was in the cards for you?
I think as a young student, I must have been ambitious. I must have been wanting to do things well. I must have been wanting to be respected by my students. But where the trajectory will be, that was not clear, right? In fact, I asked this professor, uh, am I making a mistake by being a teacher? And he said, if you're a successful teacher, there is nothing, no career is better than that. But if you're a failed teacher, there is no career which is worse than that. So that stuck my mind that if I have to be a teacher, I have to be a good teacher. I have to do justice with my job.
Sudhir, as you emphasized in our conversation yesterday, your interest in education were really central to your research and your activism. What did you learn, or what did you come away with in terms of your appreciation for education as an undergraduate yourself?
As an undergraduate, I would say it was a fairly narrow outlook that I had at that time. It was to study, to do well, to move on further, and to be a teacher. So, if I could say, I wasn't looking to the next step, but I was looking at the ultimate step of being a teacher. And I was clear that I wanted to do only structural engineering. I would not like to do other branches of civil engineering. I would not want to be an environmental engineer or a geotechnical engineer or a transportation engineer. Those things were very clear in my mind.
Now, as an undergraduate, if I recall correctly, this subdiscipline of earthquake engineering was unknown to you at the
That's
time.
right. That's right.
When it was time to think about graduate schools, did you focus exclusively in the United States? Did you think about perhaps Cambridge and Oxford also?
No, I only applied to 4 colleges in US to get the application forms. And then I eventually sent my application form only to Caltech. And while I was doing that, I also sent my application to several IITs in India for master's admission because I wasn't sure that everything will go well with my admission at Caltech, whether I'll get admitted, whether I'll get financial aid, and if so, whether I'll get a visa and things like that. So I was being conservative to apply also to Indian schools.
Now, among the 4 schools that you considered in the United States, why did you only follow through with Caltech?
The other 3 wanted $25 or $30 or $20 of application fee. And I did not have a GRE results. I did not have the English test. There is a TOEFL. So I did not have the TOEFL results. I did not have GRE results. And therefore, I was a very poor candidate for admission in that year without those results. I had appeared in those exams around the time that applications were being filled. but when I would apply, my results will not be available. So it didn't make sense to spend money on something that is very unlikely to happen.
But you still had to choose one among four. Why Caltech?
Caltech didn't ask for money.
Aha.
So Caltech was the only place out of four that didn't ask for money with the application.
Now, did you have a sense of Caltech's reputation, or was it just a small school in Pasadena that you'd never heard of before?
I had heard California from my professor, and then when I went back to Roorkee, I looked at California and I found that there are two very famous schools in California. One is Berkeley and one is Caltech. Now, I wasn't sure whether my professor meant Berkeley or Caltech. So, so I included both because the book in the library that talked about American schools that said both are very famous schools, they're very good schools. That's how California became two colleges.
Now, when you received the acceptance from Caltech, was it an easy decision? Did you also consider staying at one of the IITs?
No, once I got admission, it was very clear that is what I wanted. The only thing is that I had heard about, you still have to get a visa, and what if you don't get visa? So my deal was that until I get the visa, so I did not have a passport, right? So when I get admission, I have not yet got the passport. So now I apply for passport. I go to passport office in another town, right? I chase that. Once I get the passport, then I apply for visa and things like that. All those things take time, right? So I wasn't sure if everything will go well, and therefore I applied to some of the colleges.
I take it you had never traveled internationally before.
Never, never. I had never sat on an aircraft.
Did you have
First
any
time I
did you have any family
First
in the
time I
United
sat on an
States?
aircraft was to sit in the aircraft from Delhi to Tokyo, and then next day from Tokyo to Los Angeles.
Wow. Did you have any family in the United States?
Nobody. I had nobody. Nobody from my family had gone outside India.
What year did you arrive in Pasadena? Was it 79?
79. 79.
What were your early impressions landing in Los Angeles, getting to campus? What sticks out in your memory?
So I had no friends. I didn't know anybody. So there was a lady at Caltech by the name Ingrid Gumpel, uh, who was one person international office. So she had written a letter saying that when you go to LAX, when you reach LAX, there is a shuttle service that will take you to Hilton or Sheraton in Pasadena. From there, you take a cab, come to Athenaeum, and then give me a call. And that is exactly what I did. I went to Hilton, took the cab, went to Athenaeum, and I had no idea where I will stay tonight. And I called her from Athenaeum, and she walked up to Athenaeum from her office, and she said, "Oh, so you are here." Uh, in the sense that I had not even informed her ahead of time that I'm reaching on that day and I would need accommodation or anything like that. So she organized a senior graduate student of Indian origin. His name was Sridhar, and he was doing PhD in physics. And he said to Sridhar, "Sridhar, take Sudhir to your house, let him sleep there." And, so that's how then Sridhar took me to his house and I slept there.
Tell me about the curriculum when you started at Caltech. In what areas did you feel well prepared? Where did you have to catch up?
So the curriculum was a big surprise to me. George Hausner, who was a professor in civil engineering, had sent me a letter saying that unless you have some other ideas, here are the courses I suggest. Now, my original admission was for master's degree. And to do master's degree at Caltech, you needed 15 courses to be done over 3 quarters, 5 courses per quarter. And the list of 15 courses he sent to me were fairly broad. So out of those, three courses were mathematics, three courses were solid mechanics, three courses were vibrations and dynamics, three courses were geotechnical engineering, and three courses were business economics and management. So my romantic idea of what structural engineering should be, it should be about concrete, it should be about steel, it should be about making big buildings and big bridges. None of those courses were there. And out of the courses that I listed just now, only three courses, the solid mechanics course, came anywhere close to what my idea of structural engineering was. So I came here. Also, I realized that they require three courses, 20% of humanities and social science courses. And wisely, George Hausner had given me suggestion of business economics and management because it's a bit mathematical. It's something that suits an engineering temperament that I had as compared to a course on history or literature. So when I came here, I was a little worried that am I shortchanging my whole plan to be a holistic structural engineer? So after about a month or month and a half, maybe 2 months, I went to George Hausner and I said, the courses that I'm having here are not applied enough. They are very fundamental courses. So could I request you to write my recommendation letters for other universities? And he said, okay. So I applied to Stanford, to Berkeley, to Urbana-Champaign, and eventually I got a call from Berkeley. A professor called me from there and he said, are you sure you want to come from Caltech to Berkeley? We will be happy to give you the admission, but have you thought it through? And we had some discussion what it will mean to be at Berkeley and all that. And then he said, all right, take 1 week to decide and let me know. I thought about it. By the time I had settled here, I had understood what the fundamental courses at Caltech were doing to me. I was learning a lot and I was getting settled. And then I called him ahead of my deadline. I said, I don't want to carry the burden of this decision over the weekend. I have made up my mind. I would stay at Caltech. So that settled it. And I'm so glad that I stayed back at Caltech.
Why did you make that decision? What were you considering?
I think Caltech by the time had become a very nice place. What I have, when I came to Caltech in June for the alumni award, and there was some questions that were asked to me in my interview or here and there, Caltech was a very nice place. It does not give you any stress of any kind, right? You feel very secure. You feel the warmth of people. You're comfortable. So I had started to enjoy that. And I had also started to enjoy the fact that the academic work was very deep. So it was not covering everything that you needed, but whatever they were teaching it at very deep level.
What about your concerns that the curriculum was not as applied as you might have wanted?
Yeah, so there was a compromise, and I felt that I can make up in my own way in due course. But right now, let me enjoy what I'm getting here. And in fact, after a while, I started to become very proud of what I was learning at Caltech here.
Sudhir, did you get to know George Hausner on a personal level?
Personal level, not at a very personal level. I would say that as a student, I don't know what it means to be a personal level, in the sense that I was his student. I would learn from him. I would attend his classes. I was his teaching assistant. So he was a mentor and a guide. But would I hang out with him? Answer is no.
I'm sure you know now what a unique person he was, how wide-ranging his interests were. Did you have a sense of that as a graduate student?
Yes, we had some idea, but what happened is that my connection with George Hausner actually grew after I left Caltech. and he would keep me in his thoughts. He would send me a letter, he would send me a book, he would send me a newspaper clipping. Once in a while, I'll ask him some question about some dilemma that I had. I also made a habit at Kanpur when I was a faculty there to try to go to Caltech as often as I could. So I would go just for a few days, just sit in the library, just meet everybody, go to Chandler cafeteria, have food, uh, go to the Burger Continental, have a falafel, and just soak in Pasadena, soak in Caltech. So that kept my connection with George Hauser active. And in later years, when he stopped coming to Caltech, I would make sure that if I'm in town, I would always go to his house to meet him, or later when he was into the old age home, I would go and meet him.
Sudhir, tell me about the social scene for you as a graduate student. Did you hang out with other international students? Was there an Indian student community that were friends, or did you mix in with American students as well?
So I lived on 297 South Holliston. There was a big bungalow that Caltech owned, and Caltech had given it to students to live. So we were what is called co-op there, and there were a couple of Indian students in first year and several American students. So I started out with the living with the American students, uh, but most of the time my socialization happened more with Indian community.
Now, at what point, when you initially arrived, was it the master's program that you were going for? At what point did that simply become incidental on the way to the PhD?
From my mind, it was always clear that I have come here to do PhD. It is just that Caltech's admission process was such that they give me admission letter for masters, and then they must have given me a second letter or something, or I might have filled up a form saying that I want to continue. But in my mind, it was always clear that it was PhD.
Besides George Hausner, were there any other professors that you considered mentors or that you worked with closely?
Yeah, Paul Jennings was my thesis supervisor, and in addition, I was also influenced by Ron Scott, who taught me 3 courses of soil mechanics. So I would say these three people were my first, uh, you know, experiences of Caltech teaching and Caltech mentoring. And I learned from all three of them a lot.
What,
Later, of course, there were other professors, and yeah.
what was Paul Jennings working on when you interacted with him?
What was his?
What was he working on at that point in his career? Do you remember?
So when I was working with him, he had become very busy with work outside Caltech. For example, he became president of EERI. He would fly over to Washington, D.C. for lobbying for the funding and for various other things. So that was a period when he was really going out quite a bit for earthquake engineering community work, if I may, right? Both George Hauser and Paul Jennings had one great quality, that they would tell the students, go and do anything you want. So they never told us what research problem they wanted to do. They never gave us the research problem. So the message was, here is a library, go there, find any problem that interests you, and do a PhD in that. So they're very, very hands-off. And that was very confusing initially. That was also frustrating initially. But that was the best training that a graduate student can get, if a student can survive that. And that became my way of mentoring my students and my young colleagues, to let them decide for themselves what they want to do.
Now, do you have a specific recollection of when you became aware of the field or subfield of earthquake engineering?
Repeat again.
Do you have a specific memory of when you became aware of the discipline, the field of earthquake engineering?
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. So when I got admission uh, from Caltech, uh, it became clear that Caltech is a place for earthquake. Now, what I mentioned to you yesterday that Roorkee, where I was an undergraduate, had set up an earthquake engineering with the help of George Hausner and Don Hudson. And there was a separate department of earthquake engineering. I was studying in civil engineering department, but there was another department of earthquake engineering. And that department had two professors who had done their masters at Caltech in very early 60s, right? So I went to them to ask how is Caltech, and then one of them offered me to work with him in the summer. That is after I finish my final exams of the undergraduate, and before I go to Caltech, I could work with him. So I actually got a first job for about a couple of months working for this professor in earthquake engineering. So I became pretty familiar that when I'm coming to Caltech, I'm coming for earthquake engineering, and that was not a difficulty.
Do you remember if you thought that this field really spoke to you, that this is where you would focus your interests? Was that immediate for you?
No. The thing was very simple that you want to be a faculty in structural engineering, you have to do a PhD. And structural engineering has several branches or several specialization within structural engineering. And here you are getting an opportunity to do specialization in earthquake structural engineering or structural earthquake engineering. And you are getting that opportunity at one of the finest places in the world. So that was very exciting. That was very welcome.
Did you have any interaction with the Seismo Lab or education in geophysics?
Yeah, I did in my second year at Caltech, I did a course on physics of earthquakes from Kanamori.
Did you recognize at the time what a special researcher Hiro Kanamori was?
Sorry? Kanamori was a brilliant person, very, 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 very exciting personality.
Sudhir, tell me about developing your thesis topic. How did that come about?
Oh, that was horrible. So here I am, a graduate student who has come from Roorkee, and most Indian students who used to come to Caltech were from IITs. So I'm already a poor cousin, right? And here I am telling everybody that I'm looking for a thesis topic. While everybody is working in a research group, everybody has some clarity about their research topic, or at least broadly. And perhaps some of the friends of mine from Indian community who came from IITs, they thought that I have no idea what I'm doing. Right? So here I am. I will go to libraries, sit there with coffee, go through journals, trying to see what is being published, what people are doing, and make notes and see if I can make a research problem out of this problem. Can I get some inspiration for an interesting research problem from the topics that people are working on? So I used to do this day in and day out for months together. And I think it must have been 4 or 5 months that I did not see Paul Jennings. Paul Jennings' office was right next to the library. And he would not close his door. His door will be always open. So when I'm entering into library, when I'm coming out of library, he can see me. But I wouldn't go to him for months, right? And one day he saw me in the corridor and he said, "How are you doing?" I said, "Good." He said, "Yeah, come sometime. Let's talk what you're doing." I said, "Okay." So I went to him and he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Here are some interesting things that are coming to my mind that could possibly be a thesis topic." And he said, "Okay, tell me." So I started to tell him 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I remember telling him 6 ideas. But when I was telling him those 6 ideas, when I went to his room, I had no idea which out of 6 will go through. But when I was explaining to him these 6 ideas, uh, I said, out of these 6 I mentioned to you, these 2 look more promising than the other 4. He said, yes, that is what my impression was based on what you said. I said,
Sudhir,
all right, let
to
me.
clarify, these were 6 topics that each in and of themselves could have been their own thesis topic?
I was thinking that. Right? So then I said, all right, let me think about it, these 2, and come back to you. He said, okay. So I think after a couple of months, I went to him and I said, look, out of these 2 topics, this one doesn't appeal to me, but this makes sense to me. And this is what this problem is all about. And he got very excited in a way. He stood up. There was a coat, there was a jacket that was hanging on a hanger, on a. So he removed the coat and took the hanger and started to bend it and said, so this is what you mean that buildings will behave like that? I said, yes. He said, yeah, that looks interesting. Go and study that. That's it. After that, I started to crank that problem, and it became fairly fun activity. Every 2 weeks, I would go to him uh, with the calculations, with some derivation, and say, this is what I've solved. And he said, oh, very nice. So I'll make a photocopy of whatever I have done and give him a photocopy. And he said, I'll see it. I said, fine. After 2 weeks, again, I'll go with another one. And he'll say, oh, I haven't seen the last one. Let me keep this one also. So this kept happening for almost 3, 4, 5 times. He hadn't seen any one of them. I would tell him what I have solved. And he'll say, okay, I'll see it. And then after 4, 5 times, he said, I think you've done enough. Start writing. And he said, are you sure? I said, yeah, you've done. Go ahead, write. I was very weak in writing. I had not done writing courses. I was not privileged to go to good schools where the teachers will teach you writing. So writing took me a bit of time, fairly slow in writing. And that's when he really mentored. He, helped me write my thesis better. So that's how the thesis happened.
Do you think it was a vote of confidence in you that Paul took such a hands-off approach?
I don't know. It is hard to say what. See, what happened is that when I went there to join Caltech had given me letter that George Hausner is my advisor. Now, I was supposed to get some fellowship, some laboratory assistantship. And I was supposed to help in the laboratory work. So in my first meeting to George Hausner, I said, what work do you want me to do? He said, oh, you first study, come back to after a couple of weeks. So I went there to him after 2, 3 weeks and I said, have you thought about what I have to do? He said, yeah, study some more. We'll come back, like that. So he wasn't giving me any work for the money that I was supposed to earn. And I got a little anxious. So I one day went to Paul Jennings, and he was what they used to call as the executive officer of civil engineering or something. So I went to Paul Jennings and I said, you know what, I'm supposed to be doing some work for Professor Hausner, and I haven't got any work yet, and I'm a little worried that I should be doing my work. And he said, don't worry, we feel in first year you should study more. And it is okay if you do no work or less work. But when you go into third year or fourth year, you will do much more work. So it will even out, don't worry. So practically in first year, even though I was supposed to be a graduate laboratory assistant and I was getting money for being that, I was not asked to do any work whatsoever. Right? It so happened that after I joined Caltech, there was an earthquake in El Centro, and Ron Scott was teaching us soil mechanics course. And one day he said, I have a graduate student going to El Centro. And I said, can I go with him? He said, sure, I will ask him to take you with you. So I went with his student to El Centro, and I was in California hardly 2 or 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks. And there was a building, famous building, Imperial County Services building, that became famous because of that earthquake. That had one-story columns that had there are certain columns that had buckled and the whole bay had settled. So it was a very drastic kind of a sight. And I saw, wow, this is what an earthquake can do. So I went to the county office and I said, I'm a structural engineer from Caltech and I want to study this building. Would you give me the drawings? They said, okay, come back at 5 o'clock. We'll make a set of drawings for you. So I went back at 5 o'clock. They gave me the drawings. And I thought I'll study them. After a week or so, this graduate student must have told Ron Scott. Ron Scott must have told it to George Hausner. I don't know how George Hausner came to know. So one day George Hausner saw me in the library and he said, I hear you have the drawings of that El Centro building. I said, yes. He said, come and see me. I said, fine. So then I started to do some calculations for that, which was not part of the coursework. So I took it for this thing that my assistantship was covered by doing those calculations in some sense, by studying that building. But Caltech was very, very generous with that. Then what happened is that after a year, one day I had a meeting with George Hausner and Paul Jennings, and George Hausner was going into retirement. So he said, I will be available to you, but you will be formally working with Paul Jennings. And both of them together, they said to me that you can do anything you want in earthquake engineering, any topic you choose. Here is a library, go and study and decide what you want. Now, whether it was a confidence in my capabilities, I don't know. But when I look back, if I were in George Hausner's position, I would, at that time, I did not realize that my act of going to El Centro, when none of my other classmates chose to go to El Centro, I was just a few weeks into Caltech, going to El Centro, then going and getting a set of drawings from, it was a new country for me, new office for me. I think they must have given me some credit for taking that initiative. And it must have formed a good impression in their mind that I was a responsible person. Yeah.
Sudhir, what was the central question for your thesis? What were you focused on?
So, what happens is that when there is a building and it is subjected to earthquake vibrations, the earthquake vibrations happen in all possible directions, vertical and horizontal. Now, when the ground moves up and down, it essentially means that the weight of the building increases or decreases as the vertical acceleration happens. So suppose building is 100 kilo, it will become more, it will become 80 kilo or less, or it will become 120 kilo. And since we design it with some factor of safety, it is able to stand that vertical vibration. But what happens is the horizontal vibration, that causes it a horizontal force, for which under normal circumstances, the building is not designed for. And that horizontal vibration causes it to sometimes get damaged or collapse. Now, that is an essential aspect. Now, then what happens is that when you look at a building, it has, suppose it is a multi-story building or 1-story or 2-story or 10-story, doesn't matter. It has a concrete floor. Now, that floor, when it is vibrating in a horizontal direction, it moves back and forth as a horizontal plate kind of thing, which means that the columns go with it as if it is one solid rigid plate. And my idea at the time, and it was a relatively early years of that idea, was that what if this plate is relatively long and narrow, and therefore this plate itself is flexible and it is moving in the horizontal direction like a beam. So if I could explain to you with a piece of paper, suppose here is a floor, this is a concrete floor, right? Now what happens is that when I vibrate, it goes like this. which means all the columns that are connected with it, with the ground, they will also move back and forth. So which means that the column here and column here, they will move by the same mode. But if this plate, if this floor is, if this floor is like this now, like this, right? It is very long and its width is small. Then this floor will also bend like this. It will go like this. And when it does that, then the columns that are connected with that will have a totally different type of behavior. So that was the whole idea, that can I study what happens to buildings which have relatively narrow. Let me just show you another example of this. So now suppose there is a building which is like this. This is the way its plan is, right? It is a school building. Maybe there is classrooms here and there are classrooms here, right? Now, if the earthquake comes like this, there is a chance that it might tear like this. It might tear at the corners. So those kind of ideas, when I was able to come up with that, this is the problem that I want to possibly look at, this type of behavior. That is what was the central idea.
What were your conclusions?
There are 2-3 things we learned. One is that we came up with certain analysis which showed that under certain circumstances, this is a possibility, but this will not happen. And later, when I went back to Kanpur, one of my students, a couple of my students did extension for that and said, if you want to avoid that problem, then how do you design the building? How do you design the stiffness, the beams and the columns and the stiffness, so that this effect is minimized? So what we learned was how these buildings behave and how these buildings can be designed so that this effect will not be detrimental for safety.
Besides Paul, who else was on your thesis committee?
So there are 2 exams that you go through, right? One is comprehensive exam and one is the thesis defense, right? So for my thesis defense, there was a Professor Charles Babcock in aerospace, and if I remember it right, Tom Coggy must have been there, Kanamori must have been there, George Hausner was there, certainly Paul Jennings. Broadly, I think this might have been my thesis defense committee. My comprehensive committee might have had George Hausner, Paul Jennings, Coggy. Maybe one person might have been different, but more or less similar names, yeah.
Sudhir, what did you see with the thesis as your contributions to the field? What had you added with this work?
Sorry, what?
What did you see as your contributions with the thesis? What did you add to the field as a result of this research?
I thought that I developed a understanding of this kind of phenomena because at that time I had not seen this phenomena being discussed. And I was able to look at the literature and I was able to say that what I was discovering through the calculations, through the mathematics, through the equations was actually what was experienced by the buildings in the ground during the earthquakes. So I was able to look at the past earthquakes, what happened to buildings of, different earthquakes. And I was able to actually get 1 or 2 examples or more than 1 or 2 examples where I could correlate with what I was learning mathematically with what was happening in the ground. So I felt satisfied that I was doing something to better understand the buildings in some sense, and which led to later better understanding of how buildings should be designed better.
Sudhir, while you were in Southern California, did you experience any earthquakes? Was that useful at all for your studies?
Oh, so I told you the first earthquake was in El Centro when I was a student there. And then the second earthquake was a pretty problematic earthquake. What happened is that in 1983, I was very keen to submit my thesis by the last date, by which, if I submit, I will get the commencement degree, and I will wear the gown and uh, get my degree, because I wanted to go home immediately after my studies, and there was no chance that I was coming back for the commencement. So I was keen that I should do it well ahead of time. And it so happened that a couple of days before the last date, as Paul Jennings was reading um, possibly my last chapter or second last chapter, there was a library in Thomas Lab where there was a buzzer. Every time there is an earthquake, that buzzer will sound an alarm so that professors will know that there is an earthquake somewhere. So I was Paul Jennings, and suddenly that buzzer came, and he got up, and we both went to the library, and he looked at the seismograph, and he said, there's an earthquake. And then the phone call started coming, and next day he was off to Northridge earthquake. So what that means? That means that I'm not going to be able to submit thesis, right? So, but Caltech has been a very nice place. So I went to the graduate office where there was these secretaries, and I went to one of them, and I said, look, the last date is, I don't remember the date, let's say 15th of May, whatever date. So I said, look, 15th May is the last date, and Professor Paul Jennings has gone to Northridge, and my chapter is stuck. Do you think you can help me? He said, yeah, we'll give you 2 days or 1 day extra or something like that. So I just made it. I made it on the extended time. Last hour, I was able to submit the thesis and get my degree. So there were 2 earthquakes that happened during my years at Caltech, one at the beginning and one at the end.
Now, as you mentioned yesterday, you always knew you'd want to come back, return to India. Did you ever waver? Did you ever think that while you were at Caltech, you might make a life for yourself in the United States, or you were always focused?
I was always focused. There was only one little episode that one day happened. I was in the library and I saw an advertisement from MIT for a position in structural engineering assistant professor. And I saw that, and I went to Paul Jennings and I said, there is a position at MIT. He said, so? I said, I was thinking that I might apply. He said, but don't you always say that you want to go back to India? I said, yeah, but what is the chance that MIT will give me a job? Most unlikely. So how does it matter? And he said, my rule in my own life has been that if you don't want a job, don't ever apply for it. Because then you get sucked into something that you didn't want your life to go through. And then he gave me his own example of the astronaut program, and he was a young person. And that there was the temptation for him. He was at the Air Force Academy to apply for astronaut program. And he said, I decided that's not the career I wanted, and I didn't apply. So that was a very good learning from him for me. These are small things that happen to young people. They hear from their mentor something, and that sticks to them, which will be very hard to stick at an older age. And over the years, I've never tried to even engage with any conversation about any job that I'm not serious about. Yeah.
Sudhir, as you were focused then on returning to India, was it specifically earthquake engineering, both as a research profession and also as an area of activism for you to develop? Was that the plan from early on?
No, the plan at that time was to somehow survive India. The image at the time was India was still not an open economy. Things are very difficult economically. India was a closed economy, closed country. It was not easy to travel outside. It was not easy to buy a book even from outside. There was these big permits you needed from the Reserve Bank of India to buy foreign exchange, to be able to buy a book from foreign country, things like that. So India was a very difficult place. Supposedly. And when I was coming to India, practically all my friends and well-wishers, they thought I was going nuts, I was going crazy. and they all predicted whether I'll come back to United States in 6 months or 1 year, or how long I will survive India. So when I came back to India, my real concern was not whether I'll do earthquake engineering or not. It was whether I will settle down in India gracefully and make a living here. So, as I told you, the earthquake engineering at that time was primarily the monopoly of Roorkee. And I had gone to Roorkee to join. But I also had job offers from some of the other IITs and other places. So I went to Roorkee and I gave my paper to the head of the department saying, I'm here to report for duty. And after I gave him the paper, I said, now I want 1 month leave. He said, what do you mean? You have just given me the paper for joining today and you want a 1 month leave. What is that? I said, I have these job offers and I want to go to these places and I want to understand what India is all about, what other places are doing. It will be really helpful to me in my job at Roorkee. He said, okay, fine. So he returned my paper back to me and he said, go first and look at all those places and then come back and join. I said, fine. So then I went on a trip to India, different places that I had job offers, and I fell in place at Kanpur. I fell in love with Kanpur. It was an American setup where people had American way of doing things. We are very informal, very friendly, very flat, no hierarchy. So I just liked it, and I ended up joining at Kanpur. Now, when I was joining at Kanpur, it was clear that Kanpur didn't have any earthquake engineering. There were no colleagues doing earthquake engineering at the time. And it was clear that the chances of my being able to do good earthquake engineering at Kanpur were very, very remote. So I figured that I had learned at Caltech the structural dynamics, the dynamics of structures, the vibrations of structures. And therefore, I argued to myself that I could do ocean engineering. The structures that are sitting in the ocean, because of the ocean waves, they have to vibrate. And I could do wind engineering, or I could do earthquake engineering. All of those would require vibrations, right? And I was open-minded about it. And in fact, first 2 research proposals I wrote after joining Kanpur were in ocean engineering, actually. And both are funded. So when I joined Kanpur, I was very open-minded about what I will do. But then slowly, of course, after I went to Kanpur, I knew earthquake engineering. So I started to teach vibrations. I started to teach earthquake engineering. And slowly I started to get involved in earthquake engineering. And then 1988 earthquake came 4 years after I joined Kanpur. And that sealed the deal that there's no going back to anything other than earthquake engineering.
Tell me why. Why was that event so formative?
This earthquake had happened in northern Bihar, which is bordering area with Nepal. And it is a fairly underdeveloped area, fairly underprivileged area. And I felt the pain of the people whose houses are broken or collapsed or who are homeless. And I felt that this wasn't necessary, this wasn't needed, this could have been better. So I came back thinking that this was the mission, that people could live better after the earthquakes.
Sudhir, would you say this is the origins of when you started to think about earthquake safety as something distinct from earthquake engineering?
That's right. That's right.
What did that mean to you at that early moment? What would earthquake safety mean? How would that affect your career going forward?
You see, as an earthquake engineering person, what am I thinking? I'm thinking that I am to teach earthquake engineering to students, and they might go and solve societal problems. I will also do research work in earthquake engineering, which will be published in reputed journals, preferably international journals. And I would be considered a very smart guy, very capable guy, very competent guy, very distinguished academic. That is what earthquake engineering academic is. Now, when you look at earthquake safety, you look at it in a totally different way. You want people to not die in earthquakes. You want people to live safely in earthquakes. Now, for that, you need to teach your students, of course, because they will be part of the solution eventually. But now your research problems are driven by what you see on the ground rather than what is published in the journals. You, in first scenario, you look at the interesting problem that will be published in a good journal. But in the second scenario, you are looking at, so in the first scenario, you're saying this is a good problem that will be published in a journal. Now it may be useful or it may not be useful, but it may be useful. In the second case, you are saying, I want to solve this problem because it is of relevance to India, it is of relevance to my people. And it, by the way, it might be published. And it might not be published in American Society of Civil Engineers. It might be published from a journal in Bombay or in Calcutta, right? Which is not carrying as much academic reputation, right? Now, when you look at earthquake safety, then you say, aha, the people are working with these codes that are Stone Ages. They are not relevant. They are written wrongly. They are typed wrongly. They're giving incorrect calculation. Let me fix that. You meet somebody who misunderstands the code. You say, okay, let me teach him how to follow the code correctly. Right? Now, all these things don't give you the academic credit, but they give you satisfaction that you are solving a societal problem. Now, as an earthquake engineer, you are publishing papers for yourselves, but as an earthquake activist, you are saying, can the quality of research in earthquake engineering be better in the country? So I would now do a workshop for graduate students doing PhD or masters in earthquake engineering, collect them to IIT Kanpur, pay them travel, pay them local hospitality, do a workshop for them how to do research, give them access to all my books, all my journals, right? So that they can be a little bit better prepared to do their own work, right? I would collect their teachers in Kanpur, I would pay their travel, I pay their expenses, and I will teach them for a week some interesting stuff so that they can go back and teach their students better, right? So now your entire focus is shifted from being an academic who is trying to be good academically, distinguished academically, to a person who is trying to solve country's need or society's need. And that is where that shift happened over the years.
Sudhir, to go back to that original realization that there was no one else at IIT Kanpur doing earthquake engineering, was that part of your goal as well, to build up that discipline at IIT Kanpur?
Yes. I was very proactively campaigning to look for people who had good educational experience to bring them to IIT Kanpur. I would proactively push the administration at Kanpur to let IIT Kanpur recruit some good earthquake engineering people. So I was instrumental in recruiting somebody who had done a PhD from USC, University of Southern California, in earthquake engineering. Later, I was instrumental in recruiting somebody who was a PhD from Caltech in earthquake engineering with John Hall. And then later, I was instrumental in recruiting somebody who had done his PhD with Michigan and was teaching at Roorkee. So I brought him from Roorkee. In fact, this Caltech guy came from IIT Delhi. I brought him from Delhi IIT. The third guy I brought him from Roorkee. So my effort was to build very strong earthquake engineering, and I was a good team player in some sense to build that team, because that is what I had seen George Hausner and colleagues working as a team.
Did you build the program? Did it reach a level of maturity that you were able to have graduate students in earthquake engineering?
Absolutely. In fact, if you see most IITs today, fairly majority of them would have PhDs from IIT Kanpur teaching there, right? So we produced people who will go on to become professors in other places, in IIT Madras or in IIT Guwahati or in IIT Delhi. That was very satisfying.
So you're going from being a young faculty member when you decide to become more involved in activism. What were some of your early interactions with government where you had confidence that you were on the right track, that people were amenable to what you had to say?
I would say it was generally more frustrating than satisfying because it was a lone battle, right? Uh, to begin with, I was a single man army. Later, we had a little bit of bigger group, but uh, nothing compared to what the government bureaucrats would expect. And it wasn't easy by any stretch of imagination. But the thing was that that was not the only thing that I was doing, which means that even if I don't get a break from the government, it is still okay because I was still helping the students of other colleges to do their thesis better, or I was helping the teachers of other colleges do better, right? So, for example, I created a information center. I called it National Information Center of Earthquake Engineering at Kanpur, where I said any book, any topic, any earthquake engineering literature should be available in India to anybody who wants, and we will make sure that that happens. So when we started in 1997, it was very difficult to buy $100 book from America or from Europe. And we said, we will buy it and we'll keep it and we'll give it to anybody who wants to take it. Uh, so that's how we started actually.
So here you mentioned a colleague from the University of Michigan. Is that related to your visiting professorship in Ann Arbor?
Yeah, so he was a graduate student at that time when I went to Michigan. And there was a gentleman who did his PhD with George Hausner much before I did, Professor Naveen Nigam, who was also at Kanpur IIT professor and who had been a director of IIT Delhi also. And he was the vice chancellor at Roorkee. And he said to me, Sudhir, I want to bring some really good people at Roorkee in earthquake engineering. Do you have any recommendation? I said, here is this young man at Michigan, just finished his PhD. So he hired him at Roorkee. And Durgesh went and joined Roorkee as a young faculty. And then after a couple of years, I told Nigam that Durgesh perhaps is favorably inclined to move to Kanpur. And he said, do you really want to close down the earthquake engineering at Roorkee? He's such a bright young man. We need him here. I said, all right. The next time I met Nigam, I said, have you thought about it? He said, no, I think his career will be better served at Kanpur with you. I have no objection now. So that is how I then was instrumental in bringing Durgesh Rai to Kanpur IIT.
In building up the program at IIT Kanpur, who were some of the administrators, department heads, deans, vice chancellors who supported your vision and might have been formative as you developed your own interest in academic administration?
At Kanpur?
Yes.
See, at Kanpur, what happens is that we were far too independent as young people. We were very, very American in our approach. And we just didn't want any mentors of any kind. Right. So I was very defined to the heads or to the people who were holding positions. Right. So I was doing things on my own. I typically found that I was much more appreciated by the institute level administration, the director and the dean of faculty or dean of research, what you will call as a vice president of research or vice president of or provost, equivalent of that. So I was more popular with them, or they held me better esteem than my own head of the department. That was something that was happening, and part of it was that I was somewhat unconventional in whatever I was doing. Right? I would do crazy things that don't fit in the standard academic ethos in some sense.
So you're looking back at your tenure at IIT Kanpur. When do you feel like you got on a trajectory of academic leadership? When did that start for you?
So it so happened that in 2000, around 2000, I was made a very serious offer to become what Americans would call Vice President of Alumni Relations and Development. So we called it Dean Resource Planning and Generation. So I was made that offer and I said, no, I can't do that because I've been doing administrative work for 5 years and I have my earthquake engineering to do. Sorry, I can't do that. After that, I came to Caltech and Paul Jennings at that time was provost, and I went to Paul Jennings and I said, they made me this offer. I declined, but there is a chance that they might ask me to do it again in future. And I'm curious about this fundraising. I'm curious about this alumni relations. So since I'm at Caltech, I may as well try to learn what it is all about. Can you arrange for me to meet somebody in fundraising office to learn how they raise money? And he said, yeah, sure. So he called up somebody and he said, we'll go there. I said, you? He said, yeah, I'll also come with you. And we both went to this lady and she gave me a 1.5 hour tutorial or 1 hour tutorial. I took long notes as she was telling me. And those notes were with me. After I came back from that trip to US, the director asked me to become head of the department. And I said, wait a minute, just 7-8 months back, you offered me deanship. I declined it. And now you are asking me to become head of the department. Why do you think I will accept it? Because headship was a very stressful thing. There were certain bickerings, there were certain unpleasant things that faculty members were indulging in. And I said, I don't want to be a part of that. I would have done much more stress-free job as a dean, and I declined that. So I don't want to be head. He was quite persuasive. I talked to a couple of my mentors, and after soul searching for 2 or 3 weeks, I said, all right, I'll accept it. So that is how in 2001, January, I became head of the department. And those 3 years gave me a reasonable level of confidence that I could deal with difficult people, I could deal with difficult situations. But still, I didn't think that I would be an academic administrator the way I have become today. After I finished my deanship, almost a year later, I was offered the same job, that deanship that I had declined earlier. And again, I was initially very reluctant, but eventually I accepted and I said, fine. And the idea in my mind was that I will do my earthquake engineering and deanship will be a side job. I will not need to spend so much time on it. But then during the deanship, I started to understand what excellence in universities means. Because when you are dealing with alumni, when you're dealing with money, when you're asking for donations, your entire perspective changes. Because now people are asking you tough questions. Nobody's going to give you money so easily. People are also giving you examples of what is happening elsewhere. They're also sharing their own experiences, right? So those 3 years were very transformative for me to understand what makes a good university, what makes a good institution. And it was around that time that I went to my director and I said, would you send my name for the directorship of one of the IITs? And he was surprised. He said, wait a minute, I always heard from you that you never wanted to be a director or a vice chancellor of any university. So what makes you interested in it? And I said, I have found so many ideas during these 3 years that I find it frustrating that I bring some good ideas and my colleagues here don't accept them or I'm not able to implement them. But if I ever become the director, maybe I'll find them easier to implement them. And that may be very important contribution I can make. So that is how those 3 years were the ones that I said I'm willing to be a head of the institution.
Sudhir, tell me about the development of the National Information Center of Earthquake Engineering.
Mhm. So I was a junkie for books. Uh, so I used to buy books. I had a rule that I will never read a book without a pencil in my hand or a marker in my hand. Even today, even if I'm reading a novel, chances are that there's a pencil or a marker in my hand. Because in that novel, if there is something profound, something very exciting, something very interesting, I will mark it so that in future I can come back to it. So when I was coming back from Caltech, I was aware that India, there will be no books of the kind that I needed. So in fact, I used to go um, um, to the Lake Avenue. There was a shop where on a low budget I could Xerox a lot of literature. So I would have a lot of reports and a lot of literature that I would Xerox, and I brought loads of stuff on earthquake engineering and country. Every time I would go to Caltech, every time I will go to Berkeley, I would again Xerox a lot of stuff and I will ship them in boxes to India. So I was some sort of a librarian of sorts for earthquake engineering books. I knew how hard it is for me to get those books. And I knew that other people are not reading the books. They are not even aware what is being published. So in 1996, I had done a meeting of 30 odd people in Kanpur, where we sat for 3 days, no presentations, no lectures. And we said, let's think about how earthquake engineering can be developed in India. And one of the idea was that we should have this one place in India that will make sure that every book available anywhere in the world, earthquake engineering is there. And after that, I wrote to Nigam. I talked to Nigam. Nigam was the senior person who had done his PhD with George Hausner, and he was vice chancellor at Roorkee. And Nigam said, great idea, we'll do it. I said, do it at Roorkee. He said, yeah, we'll do it. Sorry. Roorkee had a big department. I was only two people, and I didn't have the bandwidth to do it. So I said, do it at Roorkee. He said, yeah, we'll do it at Roorkee. After a year, I wrote to him. I said, look, nothing seems to be happening. And now I'm feeling that maybe we should do it at Kanpur. What do you think? He said, yeah, do it at Kanpur. And he gave me a letter, a very nice letter, which said that Kanpur is the right place, Sudhir is the right place to do it. And using that letter, I would then start to go to a lot of government offices asking for money. And that is how I collected some money. And we started on a very, very low budget, very low cost operation. Sorry. Yeah.
Did you see the National Program on Earthquake Engineering Education as a natural outgrowth to this project?
So what happened is that meeting that I did in 1996, that meeting had these ideas that we should have this library kind of facility, information center type facility. It also said that we should have some training for teachers because they don't know earthquake engineering. So when 2001 earthquake came, that is when I was able to go to the Prime Minister's office and do a bit of persuasion and then work with the government of India and get money eventually, mobilize the other IITs and Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. And together then we were able to operate that program for almost 4 years. Yeah.
Sudhir, I wonder in developing really a national program, in what ways the internet, as India was becoming increasingly online, in what ways the internet and remote communication was useful for you in developing these programs?
I would say at that point of time, we are talking about 2003 to 2007, if I remember it right. By the time the emails were very common way of communication. And we had also started to have websites fairly well developed by the time, right? So I would not say that by the time we were doing any video conferencing or anything like that, but we were able to communicate faster because of emails. But we still had to do physical meetings. We still had to meet at one place. things like that. Yeah.
Sudhir, in a way of looking at translating your scholarly research to the activism, when did you see your work on seismic codes, on building codes for earthquakes, get adopted into municipal, regional, or even national government policy? When does that happen?
So what happened is that very early I started to work on Indian code because when I was teaching class at Kanpur very early, I realized that there were certain mistakes, errors in the publications that were coming out of official sources on Indian codes. And I said, we need to fix it. So that's how we started, actually. And then one thing led to the other, and I started to get drawn into writing codes and all that stuff. But the codes in India at that time were still not legally mandatory everywhere in India to be followed, earthquake codes. It is only after 2001 earthquake in Gujarat, where lots of multi-story buildings collapsed, that codes were made mandatory. So I would say that happened quite late. And there was not much that I did, but it was the earthquake that did it.
Sudhir, what were some of the consulting positions you took that you found especially useful, both from a research perspective for you to learn about earthquake safety and an activism perspective where you could really get the word out about the importance of earthquake safety?
So very early, I was able to get a few projects where I actually did structural design of buildings. And it so happened that there was an Egyptian student who had come to us to do a PhD and who was a teacher in Egypt. So he came to me and he said he wants to do a PhD with me. And I said, wait a minute, what do you want to do PhD on? He said, PhD on earthquake behavior of concrete buildings. I said, but I don't know enough about concrete buildings. He said, yes, I'm very good in concrete and you're very good in earthquake. So we can both work together. And he became actually my mentor in consulting projects in initial years. So here I was teaching him earthquake engineering, guiding his PhD thesis. But then when I would get a consulting project to design a building, I would, in the evening, ask him, okay, this is what I'm doing. Am I on the right track? And he'll say, no, I think you should do it this way or that way, right? So I had an opportunity to design a few buildings with the help or with the guidance of this student of mine. What it did was it gave me the confidence that I can teach professionals how to design buildings for earthquakes, because unless you have done it yourselves, you could never do it. And I remember I never worked in consulting offices, kind of thing. Similarly, I had opportunity to do some more consulting assignments, sometimes fixing a building which has already been built, but it is unsafe, and we are trying to fix that building. Things like that. So there was some nominal amount of consulting that I was able to do, particularly in the early years, that formed a foundation for me to become a better professional. Later, I was given some of these assignments came to me almost forced. There was an assignment that came to me for major bridges in India, and I didn't think I was ready for it, but they said there is nobody else that they have trust in, so they would hope that I will still take it. And I took it, I learned a lot about it, and then I grew in the process. So there was a fair amount of consulting that I was able to learn from. But to me, consulting was not the main dish. It was only a side dish that came once in a while my way.
Sudhir, in developing a national education program beyond traditional aged undergraduate and graduate students, how important was it to develop a continuing education program for mid-career professionals?
So remember that I did before I did the national program on earthquake. So the mid-career professional engineers training I did primarily from 1992 to 2001. And in the 2001, that big earthquake came that got me very distracted. And then 2003, that national program came up, which went up to 2007. So to me, that was very, very important work that we did. And fortunately, we did that work before 2001 earthquake. Because by the time 2001 earthquake came, there were almost 2,000 people that we had trained in the country on earthquake design of buildings.
When you were elected to the Indian National Academy of Engineering in 2003, I wonder if you took that as a sign that all the things that you were doing were really registering on a national level, that it really broke through. This was becoming part of both Indian academia and Indian policy.
See, I was a little bit egoistic. I never applied for any awards. I never went to anybody and said, hey, would you nominate me for this or that? Now, in India, it is very rare for people to come to you and say, we would like to nominate you for something. uh, Therefore, I never applied for any fellowships. And one day, a very eminent structural engineer asked me to give my nomination for papers for academy. And I said, no, it doesn't make sense. He says, no, leave that to me. I insist on it. And I said, all right. I got elected, but I frankly didn't take it very seriously because I frankly didn't have that much respect for these fellowships the way they were given in India, where people ask for it, right? You see, 2021, I got elected to National Academy of Engineering in the US, and I had no clue. I had no clue who sent my name, who voted for me, how they got my resume, whatever. I had no clue, right? Similarly, I got in 2020, I got this India's Civilian Award, Padma Shri. I had no clue. Nobody ever mentioned to me, right? So I actually, that Academy of Engineering election in India, I didn't take it too personally. To me, those awards were not so important as it was my own self-esteem that I could see based on what I saw in the eyes of the people that I was impacting. If they were showing me gratitude that they were benefiting from me, that gave me the real award.
Sudhir, in 2009, when you took the professorship at IIT Gandhinagar, did you retain your affiliation with Kanpur, or was this a new job for you?
Yeah. So the way it works in India is that if you are in a government-funded institution and you go to another government-funded institution as its head, as its president, then the previous employer will give you a long leave. So when I went in 2009, Kanpur gave me 5-year leave. And when government gave me another 5 years at Gandhinagar, they gave me another 5 years leave. When they gave me the third 5 years, that is when I told IIT Kanpur that I would like to take my retirement benefits from you, because by that time I had already done 35 years at Kanpur, and I didn't see much point in taking another 5-year leave from Kanpur.
What new opportunities did this provide for you, switching IITs?
Well, Gandhinagar was a greenfield project, starting from zero. I could have my own ideas, my own plans, my own things, and I could do things my own way. And I did totally crazy things, The way I ran IIT Gandhinagar was totally different from any peer institutions, including those that were created at this time that we were created. And it was very, very satisfying. It was very enriching. It was very, very exciting.
Like what? What opportunities did you have to build something from the ground up?
How do you treat the students? How do you treat the faculty? How do you treat the staff? What is your curriculum? How do you recruit faculty? How do you promote faculty? How do you incentivize faculty? How do you design the campus? What kind of buildings you want to design? What kind of community you will build depending on how you design the hostel? How do you build the buildings at a reasonable price, which will be much better quality? Right? There's so much that you can do in a greenfield project. Remember, you're starting from zero. You are having your imprint in selecting the ground on which the building will be built. When I went there, there was not even a land. I was in a rented premises. It took me several years to get the land on which I built the campus. So I was hiring the architects, I was getting the land, I was working with the architects, giving them my requirements, my vision of what the campus should be like, what it should have or what should not have. Things like that.
With so much focus on institute building and administration and education, was it really in 2009 when you began to pull away from the research and activism?
Absolutely. So when I took the flight to Ahmedabad in 2009, I went with a very clear conscience that I'm now leaving earthquake engineering behind. Yeah.
Except perhaps
That
in
had to
one
be.
except perhaps in one area when you were thinking of new buildings, was it an opportunity to build from the ground up resilient
That
buildings?
see what happens is that there is always something in you, right? So even those years at Gandhinagar, I still will be participating in International Association of Earthquake Engineering. I will be still vice president of the International Association. I'll be president of International Association. I will be invited to by New Zealand Society for Earthquake Engineering meetings and lecture, and they will give me some honor. There will be something going on, but your heart is not in it. Your passion is not in it. You are not breathing and smelling and drinking and eating earthquake engineering, right? That's what I mean.
Bringing the conversation closer to the present, did you think that you would finish out your career at Gandhinagar?
Did I what?
Did you think you would finish out your career at Gandhinagar? That you would
Yeah, I
not have
thought
a
Gandhinagar was
presidency
my last
after?
job. I was very sure Gandhinagar was my last job. I don't need anything. I'm done. I'm old enough to now, say thank you. I had a good innings, and my tenure at Gandhinagar would have gone on up to 2024. And by that time, I would have been 65. And I would have been very happy to just say thank you very much.
So when the vice chancellorship came available, your present position, did you feel like you had built up something that was approaching completeness, that you could leave this in good hands? You were satisfied with the level of development?
I never think, I think it's never done. It's never enough. There's always more to do. If you today talk to the president of Caltech or MIT or Stanford, they will still say so much more to do. Right? So, no, I don't think I had that. I don't want this part of the conversation to be put on the record, but actually, I didn't want to come to Banaras. It was some sort of a push that, I was needed here, that I was told that I was needed here.
What do you see as your legacy before coming to Banaras?
I would say my legacy would be two key ideas. One is to take earthquake engineering to the large community in India and build a strong community of earthquake safety in the country. A lot more needs to be done. It is not sufficient. It is not enough, but I think I did a fairly good job at it, building up something. Second thing will be building up IIT Gandhinagar. Most importantly, its culture. Most importantly, its ethos on how it treats its students, how it treats its people, how people respect each other, and how they work together.
Sudhir, are you committed to this being your final job, or are you open to new opportunities after this one?
No, I honestly would love if somebody were to tell me today that you can leave tomorrow from this job and I will just retire. No problem. I think I've done fairly well for myself, and personally, no more ambitions left. But anything I do, I have to do it well. That is a habit, and I can't be half-hearted in anything.
Well, Sudhir, now that we've worked right up to the present, for the last part of our talk, if I may, a few retrospective questions about your career, and then we'll end looking to the future. So let's return first to the research. What do you feel is your most significant contribution to classroom learning of earthquake engineering? What you've done that is really formative for that next generation learning the ins and outs of earthquake engineering?
You mean to say, how did I teach earthquake engineering to my students? Is that what you mean?
No, the research, the papers that you've written, the conferences that you've attended that have really influenced the field, the scholarly aspects of the field of
I would,
earthquake
I would, I
engineering.
would, I would say that some of the work that I did in masonry infill buildings, uh, some of the work that I did for uh, India specific situations like what I described just now, I would say would be valuable in the long term. Uh, it has changed the mindset, it has changed the thinking about that type of a thing. Uh, there are other smaller things that I have done which may not go that far, but I think this understanding of working with the buildings which have brick and fill masonry is, I would consider, the best work that would have long term impact. The other thing that I think that happened was uh, some of the better understanding, but that didn't get pick up. There was. I would say the other thing that I did well was the study of the post-earthquake scenario. I would go to earthquake areas, I would study them, I would record what was happening, I would publish that material. So the learning from earthquakes, I think, would be the other second thing. That I think I was a pioneer in some sense of bringing in the learning from earthquakes initiatives in India, because when I started to do that, there were very few people who were doing that, and later many more people did that.
Sudhir, as you survey your educational legacy, all the ways that you've built up the education of earthquake engineering in India, what are some of the metrics that you use? Is it the number of students? Is it the jobs that they go into? How do you quantify your achievements in building up this field in India?
See, when I'm teaching a student, a degree seeking student, whether he or she is a BTech undergraduate student, master's student, PhD student, I'm not seeing him or her as a practitioner of earthquake engineering. I'm seeing him or her as an individual who has a whole life in front of him or her, who may do anything in life, right? So, for example, one of my first student who learned earthquake engineering from me, did my BTech project with me. She went on to United States, did masters, and over the years she's working in Washington D.C. on this road safety organization where they have these dummies sit in a car and they do crashes and things like that. Right? They have this cars which crash and they see how the human body. So they have a dummy human body inside. Those kind of people. So I was very clear from beginning that when I'm teaching a degree seeking student, I don't see my intervention with that student only from the narrow glass of preparing this person for an earthquake engineering or earthquake safety career. But to make this student being able to think, to be able to analyze, to be able to solve problems, and to get a wider perspective, right? Big perspective. So degree seeking students to me were always like a clay that eventually will mold into some shape. And can I be a positive influence? Which means that more stories about life, more stories about other things that were more influential to them than the concept of earthquake. There are many, many people who have come back to me saying that you taught us, but they very rarely would say that earthquake engineering you taught us was very useful to us. They always say that those stories you told us are useful to us. Right? So that's how I see it. Then there is a second type of teaching that I did, which is to professional engineers and engineering college teachers. And that is where I think the impact of teaching earthquake engineering was, that they were real practitioners.
Sudhir, beyond India, as India transitions from a developing to a developed country, does India play a unique role throughout the developing world that might have more of an affinity or an understanding of India's experiences in earthquake safety and engineering than might be available from, say, the United States?
I agree with you entirely. In fact, during those years at Kanpur, I have done training programs at Nepal, I have done it in Bhutan, I have done it in Myanmar. Uh, I think that they were better off by learning from Indian experiences than they would from American experiences. Because as I said yesterday, the America has done 50 years back what India should be doing today. So if we learn from America's today what they're doing, it will be not appropriate for what we need to do today.
Finally, Sudhir, looking to the future, as you say, there's always more work to be done. So on that note, in the field of earthquake engineering and earthquake safety, what is most important as you have trained, as you have developed that next generation? What are the things that they need to be focused on well beyond your career, well beyond your generation?
I would say that the requirements and needs are huge. India is a very big country, but India is also a very diverse country. Uh, you go 200 kilometers and there's a different food, there is a different dialect, there is a different language, there is different clothing, there is a different type of constructions. So that makes things very, very challenging. Therefore, what I believe is that earthquake engineering should get assimilated into civil engineering rather than remain outside. And that is what my emphasis always was throughout, that earthquake engineering be not seen as a separate family from civil engineering, but it is part of the civil engineering family, which means it should get assimilated. In fact, in some of my talks, what I've said is that you don't tell a civil engineer that he needs now a rain engineer so that your building will be rain proof and will not be leaky during rainy seasons. Similarly, you don't ask a civil engineer to go to an earthquake engineer who will help you become safer building, right? It should be part of that. I think that mindset has to be built. In addition to the two things that I mentioned to you yesterday, the license-based, competence-based licensing of engineers and enforcement of codes by the municipalities.
Sudhir, one last question personal to you. When you do get that happy tap on your shoulder that you can step down from the vice chancellorship, what does the next day look like to you? Do you envision an opportunity to go back to the research, to go back to education, to go back to activism, or are there new projects for you to take on?
I would say first 3 months will be nothing, vacuum.
Recovery.
Recovery, I will go to a naturopathy place and I'll say, I admit myself, you give me whatever treatments and massages and limited food and help me reduce my weight and improve my lifestyle and things like that. I would like to spend, just time away from all of this and maybe read more novels and yeah.
And then after the 3 months, who knows? You're open.
And who knows?
Sudhir, it's been a great pleasure spending this time with you. I want to thank you so much for doing this.
Thank
It's
you,
a treasure for Caltech history, for the field, and for India. I want to thank you again.
Thank you, David. So when do I get